The leather seat of the private jet felt cold against Leila's trembling hands. At 19, she had never imagined her life would pivot on such a desperate gamble. Through the small window, the world below transformed from familiar cityscapes to endless golden dunes, each mile taking her further from everything she knew. Her mother's words echoed in her mind like a haunting melody. "You're our only hope, Leila. This marriage will save us all." But beneath those words lay a truth too painful to fully acknowledge. She was being traded, her future bartered for her family's survival. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had always dreamed of love, of finding someone who would choose her for who she was, not what she could provide. Now, at 19, she was flying toward a man she'd never met, carrying the weight of her family's financial ruin on her shoulders. Malik Al-Rashid. Even his name commanded respect in international circles. The photographs she'd seen online showed a man of striking presence, sharp jawline, intense dark eyes, an aura of controlled power. But pictures couldn't capture the essence of a person, couldn't reveal whether kindness lived behind those piercing eyes. As the plane descended, Leila pressed her palm against the cool window. The palace below rose from the desert like something from a dream, its golden domes and towering minarets catching the last rays of sunlight. Beautiful, yes, but would it become her home or her prison? The palace was a masterpiece of architecture and artistry. Every surface gleamed with precious metals and stones, every corridor whispered of centuries of history. Yet for all its beauty, Leila felt like a ghost wandering its halls. Malik had been unexpected. When he'd entered her chambers that first night, she had braced herself for demands, for claiming, for the brutal reality her mind had prepared for. Instead, he had simply looked at her, really looked, with an expression she couldn't decipher. Then, with 3 quiet words that would haunt her for weeks. "Get some rest." Days blended into nights in a routine of elegant solitude. Malik left before dawn, returned after dusk, and they existed in the same space like 2 ships passing in, an endless night. She began to wonder if this was worse than what she had feared. To be ignored, to be irrelevant, to matter so little that even conversation was deemed unnecessary. But small things began to catch her attention. When she skipped meals, fresh plates appeared at her door. When she fell asleep reading in the garden, she'd wake to find a soft blanket draped over her shoulders. When she mentioned to a servant that she missed music, a beautiful piano appeared. In the West Wing the next day, Aisha, an older servant with kind eyes, became her closest companion. "He watches you," Aisha told her one evening as they walked through the jasmine-scented gardens. "When you think no one sees, his eyes follow you." "Then why doesn't he speak to me?" Leila asked, her voice breaking slightly. "Why did he bring me here if he wants nothing to do with me?" Aisha's smile was sad and knowing. "Sometimes, the strongest men are the most afraid, child. Sometimes, they build the highest walls around the deepest wounds." What Leila didn't know was that Malik fought his own battles in the silence of his private quarters. She was supposed to be simple, a political alliance, a business arrangement. He had married before for strategy, never for love, and had sworn never to let emotion cloud his judgment again. But Leila was destroying his carefully constructed defenses without even trying. The way she hummed softly while arranging flowers, the genuine kindness she showed to every servant, the sadness that sometimes flickered across her face when she thought no one was watching, all of it carved away at his resolve. His first marriage had been a calculated betrayal. Beautiful, intelligent, and perfectly connected, Amara had seemed ideal until the day he discovered she was feeding information to his enemies, using their intimacy as a weapon against him. The lesson had been carved into his soul. Love was a luxury he couldn't afford. Trust was a weakness that could destroy everything he'd built. Yet here was Leila, 19 and achingly genuine, making him question everything he thought he knew about himself. One evening, unable to sleep, he found himself outside her chambers. Through the slightly open door, he could see her silhouetted against the window, sketching by moonlight. The image was so peaceful, so beautiful, that it took his breath away. He stood there for long minutes, torn between the desire to enter and the fear of what that might mean. When he finally walked away, it felt like a physical pain. The breakthrough came during a thunderstorm that shook the palace walls. Leila, restless and unable to sleep, had wandered the halls until she found herself outside Malik's study. The door was ajar, and through the gap, she could see him hunched over his desk, the weight of his responsibilities visible in every line of his body. Without thinking, she pushed the door open. "You look tired," she whispered, the words escaping before she could stop them. Malik's head snapped up, surprise flickering across his features. For a moment, neither spoke. Then, as if drawn by an invisible force, Leila approached his desk. Her fingers, trembling with nervousness and something deeper, reached out to brush a strand of dark hair from his forehead. The touch was electric. Malik's hand came up to cover hers, holding it against his cheek. For one breathless moment, the walls between them crumbled. Then reality crashed back. Malik pulled away, his expression shuddering. "Go to bed, Leila." The words cut deeper than any blade. Leila fled the room, tears streaming down her face, while Malik remained frozen at his desk, cursing himself for his cowardice. The truth came like a bolt of lightning on what should have been an ordinary afternoon. Leila, exploring a wing of the palace she'd never visited, heard familiar voices behind a partially closed door. Her mother's voice, urgent and calculating, discussing access codes, political leverage, and something that made her blood run cold: sabotage. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Her family hadn't just sold her to save themselves. They had planted her here as a weapon against the man who had been silently protecting her. Every kindness Malik had shown, every careful distance he'd maintained, took on new meaning. He wasn't just protecting himself. He was protecting them both from a trap she hadn't even known existed. When she finally found the courage to tell him, collapsing into his arms as the weight of betrayal overwhelmed her, Malik's response surprised her once again. "I know," he said, simply his arms tightening around her. "I suspected, but I needed proof." "You knew?" she whispered against his chest. "And I needed to know whose side you were truly on." His fingers tangled in her hair, his voice rough with emotion. "You may have just saved both our lives." That night, everything changed. In the quiet of his study, with storm clouds gathering outside, Malik finally let his walls crumble. He told her about Amara, about the betrayal that had nearly destroyed his empire, about the fear that had kept him at arm's length even as his heart yearned for her. "I was terrified," he admitted, his hands framing her face with reverent care. "Terrified that you would be another beautiful lie. Terrified that I would lose myself in you only to discover you were playing a game I couldn't win." Leila's tears fell freely as she pressed her palms against his chest, feeling the rapid beat of his heart beneath her fingers. "I would never hurt you," she whispered. "I couldn't. You've been kinder to me than my own family ever was." When he kissed her, it was with the desperation of a man who had been holding back an ocean of feeling. Every gentle touch, every whispered endearment, every moment of tenderness was a promise that she was chosen, valued, loved, not for what she could provide, but for who she was. The confrontation with her family was swift and decisive. Malik, with Leila at his side, faced down the conspirators in the old meeting hall. Her mother's shocked expression when she saw them together, truly together, was almost worth the pain of betrayal. "You thought you could use her?" Malik said, quietly, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You thought you could plant a weapon in my home and I would be too blinded by beauty to see the blade." But as the security teams led the conspirators away, Malik's attention was entirely on his wife. "What do you want to do?" he asked her, his respect for her choice evident in every word. Leila looked at her mother one last time, feeling not hatred, but a profound sadness for what could have been. "I want to go home," she said simply. Malik's smile was soft and understanding. "Then let's go home." 6 months later, the palace had transformed. Where once silence had reigned, now there was laughter. Where walls had divided, now there was intimacy. Leila had found her voice, her strength, her place not just as a wife but as a partner. She stood in the garden, her hand resting on the small swell of her belly, watching Malik approach with that same intense gaze that had once intimidated her. Now she knew it for what it was: complete and utter devotion. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "How different this is from what I expected," she murmured, leaning into his warmth. "I thought I was being sold. I never imagined I was being given the greatest gift of my life." Malik's lips brushed her temple. "We were both running from love," he said quietly. "Thank you for being brave enough to stop running." In the desert palace, where two wounded hearts had found healing, where fear had given way to trust, and where a marriage born of desperation had bloomed into the deepest love, Leila finally understood what home truly meant. It wasn't a place, it was a person, and she was finally, truly home. Lesson of this beautiful story is, sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the darkest circumstances. Sometimes the strongest bonds are forged in the fires of betrayal and fear. And sometimes two hearts, destined for each other, will find their way together despite every obstacle the world places in their path. The end. If you like the story, please subscribe the channel, hit the bell icon for more interesting updates.